Hello and welcome to Popular Antiquarian, the podcast about a middle-aged man exploring the strange and forgotten corners of pop culture. That middle-aged man is me, Hieronymus J. Doom, and we are continuing with our ongoing deep dive into Mystic Knights of Tir na Nog, the Ireland-adjacent action fantasy show from the makers of Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. One of the things that's faintly interesting about this show is that there's a definite sense of an overarching plot alongside the episodic shenanigans. The first 6 episodes have seen the Mystic Knights claim a set of magic weapons and quest for magical armour. Now Angus, the occasionally lovable rogue, Deirdre, the overprivileged shrew, Rowan, the amazing human plank, and Ivar, who is also there, are going to be tackling the next phase of their quest to save Pretend Ireland from the overweening ambitions of Queen Maeve and her entourage of unimpressive CGI monsters. That means they're going to have to tame the dragon Pyre, and that's going to be the focus of the next couple of episodes, because this is actually a 2-parter. I'm going to say at the top that I love a 2-part story, especially when it crops up in something that generally tends to do more self-contained episodes. It's a particular blessing in something like Mystic Knights with very short episodes. I'm a big fan of classic Doctor Who, and one of the things I really love about that show is the rhythm that comes from most of the stories being told over 4 25-minute episodes. I've also watched a lot of those old cliffhanger adventure serials from the 1940s in which the hero or heroine winds up in a sticky situation at the end of each instalment. And you can see a lot of the DNA of those serials in something like Mystic Knights of Tir na Nog. The formulaic elements have to be included each and every week, whether that's your young heroes donning mystical armour or 2 heavy smokers in baggy suits and tight-fitting hats exchanging haymakers. What this means is that I'm primed to enjoy these next couple of episodes more than usual, and the fact that I think this is probably the strongest the series has been so far may be somewhat coloured by my appreciation for this kind of storytelling. But hear me out, because I think the first part of this 2-parter is a pretty fun bit of nonsense TV. If there's one thing that hasn't changed, it's that Mystic Knights loves to open with a battle. I knew this was a 2-parter going in, but even if I hadn't known, I think I'd have been made somewhat aware by the noticeably more relaxed pacing. We get some conversation between soldiers of Kells on patrol, an incredibly rare chance for some minor characters to interact on screen. One of the soldiers notes how quiet everything is. Too quiet, in fact, and this is the universally accepted signal for an ambush. A warband of Temra has somehow managed to sneak up on the warriors of Kells, and General Torque immediately throws away the element of surprise by yelling the order to attack at the top of his voice. This will not be the only time that this happens in the episode. The warriors of Kells are outnumbered, and it seems to be going badly, until the Mystic Knights rock up and lend a hand by standing still and shooting their magical weapons at the invaders whilst shouting explanations of what their weapons are at the same time. That's something I'd love to see adopted more widely. It would be awesome to see Liam Neeson bellowing the make and model of his firearms each time he pulls the trigger in some low-effort action movie. Despite their addiction to exposition, the 4 heroes quickly see off the warband and celebrate with the soldiers of Kells, who seem to include at least one woman, and she's technically got a line. Okay, that line is just cheering alongside all the other extras, but it does represent progress of a sort. After the battle, there's time for the briefest of celebrations with King Conovar before Rowan announces that having obtained both their magical armour and their magical weapons, they should now attempt to tame Pyre, the dragon of Dare, who will somehow lead them to the next phase of their quest to find the fabled Knight Draganta. Conovar notes that time is of the essence, because Maeve will not allow her latest defeat to go unanswered. And that is the excuse we need to go and check in on Castle Temra, where General Torque is furious at once again having been beaten by the Mystic Knights. This gives Maeve an opportunity to both fume and also reiterate the premise of the show for the hard of thinking. She can't conquer Kells until the Mystic Knights have been eliminated. It's been a great episode for people telling other people things they already know and agree with, much like a radio phone-in with Nigel Farage. Fortunately, Maeve has a new plan to deal with the Mystic Knights, and it's an extremely exciting plan because it doesn't involve either separating one of the knights from the others or summoning a monster struggling with a traumatic brain injury. Instead, she's going to get the 4 evil sentinels to combine their efforts to form an unbeatable fighting force, a force which she, for unclear reasons, refers to as a brigade. There's an odd feature of this show, which I've not really mentioned before. which is the way modern military terminology is used to describe certain troop formations. We've already seen various warband-sized groups of warriors referred to as battalions, for example. That's already a bit weird, since battalions are traditionally rather larger than the handful of men we've seen it apply to for this show, but I get that it sort of makes sense as a military term for a decent-sized chunk of warriors. It's a little strange to apply modern language to a style of warfare that usually just involves unruly mobs running at each other and going at it, but I get that the affordances of something like battalion are useful. Brigade, on the other hand, is a really bizarre term to use for 4 blokes in silly jumpsuits. Brigades are bigger than battalions, indeed they are composed of multiple battalions. It's not super important in the grand scheme of things, but it just felt jarring. The only problem is that in order to forge the 4 sentinels, the Rockwolf, the Lightning Bat, the Sea Serpent and the Ice Lord, into a cohesive fighting force, she's going to have to make a deal with their master, Maeve the Dark Elf, who obligingly pops out of the magic cup in order to give Maeve a characteristically camp and idiosyncratically acted ticking off. Once again, Ned Dennehy is tremendous value in the role, delivering every line with the affected intonation of a minor member of the aristocracy 2 bottles of champers down at lunch. Maeve is wildly unimpressed with Maeve's progress so far, and we get to see a rare vulnerability in Maeve as she almost begs him to give her another chance. It feels like we may be seeding the idea that Maeve will be the ultimate final boss of the show, and Maeve's deference and hints of fear add welcome depth to their relationship. This is a good example of a slightly slower pace, giving some of the characters a bit more room to breathe in this 2-part story. She explains her cunning plan, and Maeve obligingly summons all 4 sentinels, apparently impressed enough with the scheme to continue supporting her for the moment. There's a glorious bit where all 4 sentinels greet Maeve at the same time, and their stupid croaking voices speaking in unison sounds like a Spectrum loading. Maeve says that a test is in order, and the 4 sentinels do what everyone in this show loves doing, which is explaining what their weapons are. I actually quite like this because it highlights that they're very much a dark mirror of the Mystic Knights themselves. Maeve summons a group of weird spectres to put the sentinels through their paces, and to my surprise the spectres look pretty good, writhing, sinuous things that fly through the air in a manner that interacts very well with some actors swinging weapons more or less at random. At first, things seem to be going badly, until Maeve demands that the sentinels fight together. Following this order, the sentinels rally and see off the spectres, but I have to stress they do this by continuing to do exactly what they were doing before. Literally nothing visibly changes in their approach to the fight. I can only assume that the fight coordinator looked at the script, couldn't see an obvious way to convey teamwork in the 10 seconds allotted to the combat, and just decided not to bother. Nonetheless, Maeve reacts like she's just seen the Road Warriors hit their Doomsday Device finisher. It looks like everything's coming up Millhouse. This plan seems pretty baffling on the face of it. After all, there's still only 4 sentinels, which means that they'll still be fighting one-on-one with the Mystic Knights, all of whom have defeated a sentinel in combat even before they had access to their magical armour. Surely the sentinels will pose even less of a challenge now? Apparently fighting ghosts for 20 seconds will be enough to level the playing field in some unspecified fashion. Meanwhile, the Mystic Knights have travelled to the Caves of Dare to take on the dragon. Last time they tried it, it went quite badly for everyone, and extremely badly for Angus's trousers. This time we begin with an opportunity for Angus to complain about how far away the caves are and demand that they stop for a rest. He seems almost as furious as he was last episode, and it's surprising given that I've seen big Tesco's that felt larger than the Kingdom of Kells. When Ivar makes a sarcastic comment about Angus's laziness, Angus responds by grabbing a stone and yeeting it at the back of Ivar's head in yet another example of a supposed hero trying to inflict grievous bodily harm when he feels mildly snubbed. Ivar spots the stone and ducks, and it strikes Deirdre instead, which gives her an opportunity to show that she too is an extremely angry person. Angus, fleeing her well-earned wrath, tries to claim it was an accident, and if he's lying, may a bolt of fire strike me from the sky. And this is the place that the scene has been awkwardly stumbling towards, because from the mouth of the cave, the Dragon of Dare breathes out a bolt of fire, which strikes Angus in the bottom in a pleasant echo of the first time they met the dragon. Bottom-related hilarity aside, they still need to tame that dragon, and it really doesn't look like it wants to be tamed. It looks like it wants to set fire to people, which is very much how I feel when there's a knock on the door and I'm not expecting a parcel. Rowan has a plan, which is that they're going to go into the cave and tame the dragon. As a strategist, he would have been right at home in the First World War. It's fair to say it doesn't go much better than the last time they tried, despite the presence of their magical armour. Their early approach seems to be to let the dragon repeatedly breathe fire on them and fall over. Plan B is that they all grab the dragon by the tail, which will definitely get it to calm down. As any heavily bandaged cat owner will tell you, animals just love being grabbed by the tail. Mellows them right out. The dragon deals with this by lashing its tail from side to side and sending the knights flying in all directions. This is by far the most impressive fight with a CGI monster we've seen so far in the series, which is praise so faint it would be drowned out by an asthmatic dung beetle beatboxing. It still looks hella bad, but at least there's a sense of dynamism to it, and the dragon is doing more than simply stand around and shoot lasers from its face. The next tactic is for Deirdre to declare that this requires a woman's touch. She tentatively approaches the dragon, whispering soothingly as she does so. Then, when the dragon snaps at her, she loses her rag and punches it in the face. I absolutely love this moment, because it's a little bait and switch that plays the traditional depictions of femininity against Deirdre's bottomless reservoir of rage. Also, the image of someone just delivering a right hook to a dragon's jaw has an absurd quality about it. It's like seeing Darth Vader headbutt someone. There's nothing that says Darth Vader couldn't nut someone in the heat of battle, but certain types of combat have an implicit visual language, and lamping a dragon like you're fighting in a flat-roofed pub nicely undercuts that dragon fighting expectation. I like seeing that the writers are having a bit of fun with Deirdre's temper as well. She makes a much better cauldron of bubbling rage than Angus. Finally, they hit on the idea of combining their weapons. This also doesn't work because, much like Diablo 4, the monsters they face have an irritating habit of scaling with their level. With every effort at taming the dragon having failed, they are forced to do the one thing I've been dreading: retreat in order to talk to King Finvara of Tir na Nog. Rowan takes Finvara to task, and Finvara says that it's their own fault. Angus is distracted by a pretty elf maiden and takes the opportunity to be incredibly sleazy at her, which again raises all manner of questions about anatomy. It also suggests that Angus needs to be put on a list. Fortunately, the elf maiden responds by turning into an ugly goblin and gobbing some black goo at him, to the delight of all assembled. Sure, it's nice to see a creep get given short shrift, but I can't help but feel this sets an ominous precedent, considering Angus is presumably going to wind up in a position of power and trust eventually. Rowan and Ivar get back to the job in hand, which is complaining about how hard it is to tame a dragon, and Finvara offers some more of his gnomic and utterly unhelpful advice. He shows them a vision of a turtle. "Behold, the simple turtle," he says. "The slowest animal on earth fears no one, for it knows how to battle all foes." This is the only advice he is prepared to offer, and it's interesting on a number of levels. Firstly, there's plenty of animals slower than a turtle. Starfish, for example. That's a straight-up lie. Secondly, turtles are not immune to fear. Thirdly, and perhaps most importantly, turtles do not know how to battle all foes. Adult turtles are regularly eaten by sharks, crocodiles, and crucially the orca that can sometimes be seen off the coast of Ireland. Literally, the only true thing Finvara has said is, "Behold the simple turtle." And that's only because whether or not you consider a turtle to be simple is subjective. It's more evidence for my increasingly firm belief that King Finvara of Tir na Nog is a commentary on the hereditary insanities endemic within the upper classes. He's a gibbering loon with the IQ of a sack full of concussed mackerel. The Mystic Knights, to their credit, are clearly finding this diminutive nitwit as aggravating as I am, and there's a clear sense of their frustrations at his surrealist pronouncements as the scene fades out. We now get a little bit of filler in the form of General Torque inspecting his troops, which is another weirdly modern military behaviour. He seems rather more concerned with uniforms than I imagine the average Celtic leader was in ancient Ireland. If you assembled your troops for inspection in the period this series is trying to evoke, it would only be to see how many had died of dysentery in the night. He then approaches Maeve and they remind each other of the plan to attack Kells with the soldiers and use the 4 sentinels to take out the Mystic Knights. The people of Pretend Ireland love nothing more than telling each other things they already know. There's a lot of magic lying around Pretend Island, but not so much object permanence. Back at Kel's castle, the Mystic Knights are trying to work out precisely what Finvara was babbling about. Rowan suggests that it's something to do with the turtle's shell and how it acts like armour. This is the most obvious interpretation. Ivar says that the dragon's cave acts like a shell, which suggests that his branch of the nobility is subject to the same galloping insanity as Finvara's. Angus tries to relate it to pickpocketing, which impresses nobody. It should be clear to anyone that attempting to divine meaning from King Finvara's ramblings is a task every bit as thankless as trying to analyse one of Trump's barely comprehensible word salads, but I guess that Ivar and Deirdre, being part of the same firm, gives them an incentive to pretend that there's method in the madness somewhere. It's now time for a quick cameo from the fairy Aideen, who gets to show off her magical powers and be mean to her love rival Deirdre. She does the former by conjuring some turtles for the knights to play with, and the latter by lying to Deirdre when she asks if the turtles will bite. Armed with 4 small turtles, surely the Mystic Knights will be able to solve the riddle. Kahad the Druid rocks up and provides a handy insight that instead of looking at the turtles, they should think like a turtle. Of course, says Rowan, when a turtle is attacked it doesn't do anything at all, it just waits for its opponent to tire itself out. This is of course another turtle-based lie, but at least it suggests a plan, which is more than they've had so far. Trying to do the old rope-a-dope on a fire-breathing dragon doesn't sound like the best idea in the world, but it has the virtue of being theoretically exciting and also quite easy to stage. To add extra jeopardy to the affair, King Conovar pops in to let the knights know that the forces of Queen Maeve are once again massing on the border of Kells. The knights leap into action, but no sooner have they assembled at the entrance to the dragon's cave than the 4 sentinels turn up to attack en masse. This leads to what is objectively the best fight in the show to date, as the sentinels seem happy to actually brawl with the heroes rather than just standing about. There's some awkward sword strokes and Deirdre lands some kicks that look quite strong. Angus and Ivar grab a sentinel each by the arm and swing them face first into each other, which is a really nice spot. It's still pretty slow and clumsy, but at least it does look like people actually trying to do each other a mischief rather than playing some kind of weird live-action top trumps. Initially, it has to be said the fight is going more or less as you might expect, given that all 4 sentinels have already lost to the Mystic Knights. This makes Rowan suggesting they need their magical armour a bit odd, since they seem to be winning fairly easily without it. Nevertheless, the format demands we show off the action figures, so Rowan creates a wall of fire to keep the sentinels back while the knights transform. While the knights are getting on their posh clobber, the sentinels are hatching a cunning plan. This turns out to be sneaking up behind the knights while they're getting dressed and then loudly announcing themselves so the Mystic Knights have time to get ready, which is sporting but hardly elite tactical nous. No one in the Kingdom of Kells or Temra really understands how ambushes work. Fortunately, their next plan is somewhat better, as it involves separating Deirdre from the other knights and then grabbing her before threatening to kill her if the knights don't surrender their weapons. Angus, Rowan and Ivar obey despite Deirdre's protests, and the mystical knights suffer their first really serious reversal of fortune. This is, perhaps typically for Mystic Knights of Tir na Nog, a scene that works better in conception than it does in execution, because it ends up feeling quite muddled. Deirdre's separation isn't visually telegraphed, and her being grabbed feels like it comes out of nowhere. It also trades on the hoary old cliché of the damsel in distress, which is a little jarring considering how generally angry and competent at fighting Deirdre is. They soften the cliché a little by having Deirdre visibly furious at her comrades for surrendering their weapons, but the fact remains that the only woman on the team is being cast in the role of the one who must be protected at all costs. Realistically, it was only ever going to be Deirdre or Angus taken prison. To lapse into wrestling parlance, they're only ever going to book Rowan to make him strong, regardless of how boring he is, and Ivar's gimmick is too aloof to make him a convincing victim. Angus, as the comedy one, wouldn't be especially hurt by being taken prisoner, and I think he would have been a more interesting choice, but equally, he's not actually sympathetic enough for it to make sense for the rest to immediately down tools the moment there's a threat to him. That leaves Deirdre, who as a princess of the realm is also the most valuable bargaining chip from a social status position as well. So that means that Deirdre ends up having to do the typical damsel thing almost by default, even though it's not really a good fit for her character. More than anything else, this really highlights the pitfalls of only having a single female character in your core cast. Gender swapping one of the other three would have made this scene feel a lot less awkward, I think. I reckon they would have still gone down the damsel in distress route because the narrative shorthand is too useful, but I think Girl Ivar or Girl Angus would have been the better option to be in that spot and keep Deirdre's gimmick intact. I don't even necessarily have a huge problem with a damsel in distress as a trope when it's the right damsel. Much as I always enjoy seeing gender norms upended, those gender norms do exist within society and within stories. And while I think many of these norms are problematic and harmful, there are ways of engaging with them that can be interesting. When you have as many female characters as male, that gives you the space to have some of those characters embrace more traditional aspects of femininity, just as some women do in the real world. Although not really any of my friends. The issues around gender roles cuts both ways too. Some of the reasons Rowan is such a tedious plank of a man are to do with the constructions of masculinity, and maybe we'll get to talk about that in more depth at some point. I think the authors were aware that there's a disjunction between Deirdre's characterisation and the role the script has forced her into, because as soon as Rowan, Ivar and Angus are disarmed, she wriggles free of the sentinels holding her and starts landing punches and kicks with gay abandon. The fact remains, though, that the Mystic Knights have suffered a serious setback, and without their magical weapons they are forced to reluctantly retreat. This is a huge deal, obviously, and represents the most jeopardy we've seen so far. It's really good to see the Mystic Knights on the back foot for most of this episode. They failed to tame the dragon, and now the Sentinels have managed to best them in battle. There's a fun little callback to an earlier episode in that it was previously made clear that one of the biggest challenges for the Mystic Knights is working as a team, and it's teamwork that has allowed the Sentinels to temporarily gain the upper hand. Also, with Rowan's insight about taming the dragon by not attacking at all, it seems likely that they're going to be able to do that at some point, even without their magical weapons. So the script has foreshadowed at least one possible avenue for resolving this crisis. Things are going badly for the forces of Kells as well, and we get a shot or two of the beaten soldiers routing as General Torque has a nice little chuckle to himself. We cut to Temra Castle and Maeve offering fulsome congratulations to her victorious forces. This episode has done a bang-up job of re-establishing Temra as a legitimate threat, which was sorely needed after a quartet of humiliations for the Queen. There's lots of cheering and the forces of evil are having a lovely old time. There's no complimentary buffet lunch, which feels like an oversight, but at least Queen Maeve is in a good mood for once. There's just time to call in at Kells Castle before the end of the episode. Kahad the Druid tells them that surrender is fine when there's no other option. King Conovar paints a gloomy picture of the prospects for an independent Kells. Ivar points out that they will need Pyre the dragon and must face him without their weapons, and Deirdre adds that they'll need to face the Sentinels unarmed as well. It's at this point that Rowan pipes up, and what he says is special. He says, "No surrender." No Surrender probably didn't have the same associations to writers Joel Barkow and Louis Zavot as it does to those of us who grew up in the British Isles in the 80s and 90s at the tail end of the Troubles. No Surrender was a popular slogan amongst militant unionists in Northern Ireland, which referenced the 1689 siege of Derry by Catholic Jacobite forces opposed to the Protestants Queen Mary and William, who had come to power in the UK in the Glorious Revolution. It formed the basis of a unionist football chant, "No Surrender to the IRA, and came to be emblematic of a certain strand of militant unionism which saw any accommodation with Catholic nationalists in Northern Ireland as a form of treason. In many circumstances, it has overtones of support for the unionist paramilitary groups who conducted their own campaign of violence and intimidation in opposition to the IRA's campaign of violence and intimidation, sometimes with the tacit support or outright collusion of British security services. No Surrender has really quite strong emotional resonance in the British Isles, especially when said in an Irish accent. It's got to have been an odd day at work when actor Lachlan O'Merin saw that in the script. I'm just thankful he's from the Republic of Ireland and we didn't have to hear it said in a broad Ulster accent. It really is a good job that this was never shown in the UK. It doesn't help that the Irish legends that form the loose basis for the Mystic Knights of Tir na Nog King Conovar is the ruler of Ulster, while Queen Maeve is the ruler of Connacht. I think that technically means that the Mystic Knights of Tir na Nog is Unionist propaganda. The Warriors of Kells wear orange cloaks and everything. I'd love to think it was deliberate on the part of the show's creators, but I'm almost certain that it wasn't. Americans usually err on the side of supporting Irish nationalism in Northern Ireland, presumably seeing parallels with their own war of independence against the British Crown. Part of me hopes that the writers were just rabid Protestants and we'll wind up seeing a mural of the Mystic Knights on the side of a barn as a bunch of red-faced farmers in orange sashes march by. It's a wonderfully inappropriate place for the episode to end, but there is potentially a lot to look forward to in the next episode. We've got an actual cliffhanger and the peril has ramped up nicely. I'm really looking forward to the next episode. I hope very much you will join me for that. In the meantime, if you want to get in touch with me, you can do so by email at hjdoomretrofun, all one word, at gmail.com, or by following me on Blue Sky at hjdoom. You can support this podcast on Patreon by going to patreon.com/hjdoom and pledging as little as a single English pound or local equivalent to keep it on the air and ad-free for everyone. All support is tremendously appreciated. Thank you very much for listening. Take care, and I'll see you soon.